Yes, fellow members, partners, volunteers, and friends of the Bird Society of Singapore, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you here to the official launch of the Bird Society of Singapore. I'm Cheng Teng. I'll be guiding you through this event. Building upon the successes of the Singapore Birds project over the past 7 years, the team has applied with the Registrar of Society and was registered under Societies Act of the Bird Society of Singapore on 20th of March 2023. Shortened to BirdSoc SG, the Bird Society has put together this event to celebrate the beginning of our new chapter with all of you. Before we continue, we would like to give a shout out to our event sponsor, our venue sponsor, the National Library Board. Without them, this event would not have been possible. And without further ado, I will hand over the time now to Dr. Shawn, Senior Lecturer at the Asian School of the Environment, Nanyang Technological University, for opening remarks. Dr. Lam, please.
Well, good morning. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Bird Society to this very wonderful, special, happy occasion. We have a new society, and every society that's launched is a cause for celebration. So I just want to say a few things in three separate areas. One, as a member of civil society. Second, as somebody who's interested in conservation. And the third is in my own sort of profession as a teacher. So the first is, the beautiful thing about civil society is that when people have something to share, something meaningful to say, people are able to come together and create groups to share something that they believe in really strongly about. And I think this is a great example. I think maybe about 20 years ago, we saw something similar in the animal welfare space, where before there was just, there was the SPCA, which was really the long-established society, animal welfare society. And then we saw a whole plethora of cat welfare, mega catchery, action for Singapore dogs. And I think what each of these organizations did was brought something different and complementary to that space. And I'm really hoping that the Bird Society of Singapore, which has, as most of you all know, has been populating their online resources with species information page. It's very useful, not just for birders or people interested in birds, but for the general public. It helps raise awareness, upskills anybody who really wants to take up bird watching as a hobby. I think it's played a very useful role already. And I think as a bird society, I think that effectiveness can grow. So I think that's a wonderful thing. I forgot to mention the rare bird database and many of the other great things that you are doing. Now the second thing, though, is a personal anecdote. When I was an undergraduate, my university had a zoological museum in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I remember my teacher giving a tour. And at that end of this story, sorry, Movin, when they ask me to speak, it takes too long. So when I was a boy, my parents had a little mini atlas, pictorial atlas, to the Hawaiian Islands, because that's where I grew up. And I used to flip through that. And then this photo reproduction of a feathered cape that the high chiefs would wear, and all these colorful red and yellow, black feathers. And the birds that I've always wanted to see them. One was called an opo, another one called the mamo, which is already extinct at that time. Either apapane, all these, most of these creepers, which is a unique, it's a subfamily of finches. So I went to university and we're doing a tour of the museum, and I asked my teacher, is it all right maybe see the Hawaiian?
I'm hearing that as well.
So we go to this drawer, opens it up, and there are like hundreds of beautiful birds with names such as Nukupu'u or Akialoa or the Iiwi. I saw the mamo. And I was thrilled, I was so excited. These are things that I had read about since I was a little boy. But then I was profoundly sad knowing that no one could ever see any of these birds, the extinct ones, alive, because they were long extinct. In fact, one of them, the ho-ho, it turns out much later that research showed that this was an endemic family of birds to the Hawaiian Islands, the only family of birds to completely go extinct. And so, when we look at the State of the World's Birds report from last year by BirdLife International, it turns out half of the world's bird species are in decline. Over 10%, well over 10% are endangered. With those endangered, are threatened with extinction. Half are either endangered or critically endangered, the other half being vulnerable. The primary threats include habitat conversion and industrial agriculture. And so my plea to the Bird Society, actually to all of us, in whatever capacity we stand, is the hobby is great, and it's a wonderful way to rewarding pastime to look at animals, including birds. They're beautiful, they're exciting, invigorating, inspiring. But how can we, as a community, contribute in our own way to make sure that 100 years from now, people will still be able to see 10,000 species of birds? So that's kind of the ballpark. Okay. So I do a little homework. So that's my hope as a conservationist, and that each new member of this community works in a complementary way, so that we can continue to enjoy the things that we love about nature. And I think I'm very encouraged and very hopeful that the Bird Society will be a very important voice in the bird conservation, nature conservation community. I think you bring a skill set that's very much needed in this community. Third thing, and this is a teacher. Now everyone, I'm not a parent, but I'm sure with any young person, you want that person to, first and foremost, grow up without fear, without discrimination, without want. On top of that, you hope that maybe they live a life that's rewarding and meaningful, and that they can actually, even beyond that, through their actions, somehow make the world a little bit better. Now, as a teacher, it's an amazing thing. I see a few people here, like for example, Sankar sitting up here in row 3. We did a project together about 2010 on seagrass. It's neither of our speciality, but now to see Sankar from an enthusiastic secondary school student to become one of the leading evolutionary biologists and herpetologists in Asia, I as a teacher, can think of nothing more fulfilling and joyous than seeing something like that. And I see so many of you, and over the years I see Ying Sin and Tong, and others like Yong Ding Li, Lo Bing Wan, all of these people who, from the time they were teenagers, were enthusiastic, but that enthusiasm, the Shawn, morphs into expertise. And again, there's nothing more a teacher wants than to see young people become better, to take the field further. And I got to know the Singapore Birds Project and Bird Society. I know Francis, you're the progenitor, but I've had the opportunity, since they were undergraduates, to work with Movin, Keita, Sandra, and Dylan. And again, they were already kind of almost fully formed, but still had a long way to go. But look at that. I mean, so from, again, enthusiastic undergraduates to these people will lead ornithological science and conservation for decades to come. And again, there's nothing, I mean, Michael Boomer, Rosario, you're also academic, Siva, you know how it feels. I can't be prouder to stand up here, and I'm more honored than for you to ask me to make these introductory notes. I have nothing to teach you anymore. I come to you for information. But at a personal level, if you ever need anything, even if that's something like a cup of coffee or word of support, it's yours. Thank you for allowing me to open this very wonderful, joyous, celebratory occasion. And now for all of you, we're going to learn some exciting things about what the Bird Society has in store for us and for Singapore and for the world of bird conservation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lam, for those kind words. The President of the Society, Mr. Keita, will now present the token of appreciation to Dr. Lam. Okay, we'll now be taking a group photo with everybody. With the participant. Yeah, you can remain seated.
Can I get the last 3 rows to stand up?
Okay, last 3 rows, please stand up.
Okay. Ready? Try to find a window.
Keita has represented organizations to speak at various panels and conferences, such as the Functions Natural History Museum's webinar series and the Asian Research Institute's conference on invasive species earlier this year. In his personal capacity, Keita is the research assistant and a master's student in the National University of Singapore. Keita will be sharing with you more about the Society's history and goals. Keita, over to you.
This photo of a stock-billed kingfisher changed my life. 16 January 2014 was a strange morning for me. I just returned from a vacation to Japan, during which I wasn't a bird watcher yet, but I had the chance to visit the bird park. I was just taking photographs of everything that was flying around with my camera and had a lot of fun. After coming back to Singapore, for some reason, I was unable to sleep well that day, and I was just Googling around birds of Singapore in a foreign language. And then I was searching through many different blogs, just randomly scrolling around. And I found this one picture of the kingfisher. I don't know what it was about this picture, but I was just extremely captivated. I could not believe that I had a chance to see a bird like that in Singapore in the wild. The whole time, 18 years in Singapore, I thought it was just all concrete, no nature at all. And so impulsively, I took my camera and I ran out to West Coast Park. I had my first lifer that day. I didn't even know what it was just a bird flying around. And I saw many other stuff. Black bird, white bird, yellow bird, green bird. Completely no idea what they were. But I just know that I had a lot of fun. 2 weeks from this day, I had to pay a visit to Pulau. But every time I had booked out, every time I had off days, I was just bird watching, bird watching, bird watching. I became completely obsessed. There was a small problem though. Back in 2014, I was what you would call a completely socially awkward introvert. I had no friends, I was just birding all alone. No one to teach me the arts of birding. And everything that I could learn was from online platforms, so random people's blogs, articles, and all these sites that I had to compile information for myself and try to learn with my own, through my own experience. It wasn't easy. There wasn't a consolidated website for me to learn bird watching. Fast forward 2 years in late 2015, something happened. I met a veteran birder when I was bird watching one day, and he told me about this particular website, this very famous site, Facebook. So yeah, 19-year-old me didn't have Facebook, and this veteran birder, I think he was quite close to 70 back then, he told me about Facebook, and I went home and I got an account. So I went back, I looked through different groups that seemed relevant to what I was interested in, and I found this, bird sightings. Sharing of wild bird sightings, photos, videos from Malaysia and Singapore seemed relevant, so I joined it. And things started to change. I started posting my own sightings. This is a particular rare bird that I found in West Coast Park. I shared it, got likes, got comments. Finally, I felt like I was part of a community. I felt like the work that I was doing was common with other people in Singapore. I wasn't alone anymore. Just as my bird watching journey entered a new chapter after I got Facebook, there was a different project that was starting elsewhere, and that was the Singapore Birds Project. This is a post from 2016, a very modest post by Francis, not a grand launch like what we're having here today. Sorry. Yeah, so as soon as I saw this post, I was like, wow, very cool. The first thing I clicked on was not the link, but his profile. I'm like, wow, this uncle, okay, very cool. And then I clicked on the link, of course. The main objective of the site was to list information about all the birds in Singapore, and I was scrolling through the website and extremely impressed. Excellent photos of many birds in Singapore, very detailed information. Finally, there was a site that I could refer to that had all this information in one easy click. At the same time, after joining the Facebook groups and learning about Singapore Birds Project, I learned of the many different places in Singapore that I had not explored yet. Places that I could go to find more birds. One of the places that I went was Jelutong Tower. For those of you who know Francis, you will know that if you want to find him, you should just go to the tower. He's always there. He has a PR checklist. And so I visited Jelutong Tower, and eventually I met Francis, and I also met several other bird watchers who helped guide me through my journey, learning what it was like to be a birder. Eventually I had the chance to meet many of them. Francis over here, founder of the Singapore Birds Project. Sito, who is in the room, also co-founder of the Singapore Birds Project, and several other members that you will see here today. So this is a picture of us looking for the brown booby that was found in Sungai Buloh back in 2016. I think it was found by David Lee and his team. So we were out around Lim Chu Kang looking for it on a boat. Eventually we saw it. This is Francis' amazing photo, and this is mine. So you can see that one of the appeals of the Singapore Birds Project was the excellent photos that Francis and his teammates were taking to ensure that people would actually know what the birds were looking at looked like and not something like that. So I've shared a little bit about my story. Now let me tell you more about the Singapore Birds Project. Back before the Singapore Birds Project started, there were several knowledge gaps in Singapore, and one of them was checklisting. Now, there were various checklists going on around Singapore, but they were not really consolidated. They weren't following a proper taxonomy, and this is one example. This species of bird that many of you will know, the Javan myna, is also known by a different name, called the white phantom myna. But back then, as a newbie bird watcher, I didn't know the difference. What's the white phantom myna, what's the Javan myna? Are they the same, are they different? And what the Singapore Birds Project did was to have a proper checklist, following a proper taxonomy, making sure that all of us knew what the birds in Singapore were called. Another important thing about checklisting is having rationales. So when species are removed or added to checklists, it's important to make sure that people know why these things happen. Whether they were removed because of a certain threshold, whether they were added because of certain records. These were things that the Singapore Birds Project ensured was included as information. Apart from that, there were occasional articles about how to be a bird, a better bird, some science articles. I no longer had to refer to the random bunches of websites anymore. There was finally something that I could use as a free field guide for myself. So now let me tell you a little bit more about some of the founding members. Many of us met in NUS. We were either from life science or environmental studies mainly. I finally found a group of people that were around my age that could go exploring around Singapore and the region with. We went bird watching, not just in Singapore, also in Malaysia, Indonesia. We learned in the field what it was like to understand the ecosystem and the birds in the region. We also took part in various surveys, conservation events, outreach events. This was how we gained our experience of what it was like to work in the local ecosystem. So after about 5 years working in the local ecosystem, we found the need to find a safe space where we could find like-minded people to work on project ideas and care. And that was where our goals and the Singapore Birds Project's goals aligned, and we joined and formed the team. One of the first things we decided to tackle was the knowledge gaps in Singapore. And a particular aspect that we decided to look at this was through records keeping. Now here's an example of a species that's now almost gone from Singapore. There are perhaps breeding populations in Pulau Tekong, but the white-chested babbler is almost gone from, pretty much gone from Singapore Island and Pulau Ubin. Now as you can see from the screenshots above, these are some old screenshots. You can tell because the paper is a bit brown. Yeah. The white-chested babbler used to be a very common species in Singapore, but it's now gone. The thing is, back before we started compiling information, it wasn't very clear when exactly and where exactly the last few sightings were. So this was one of the aspects that we tackled by looking through historical records, finding all of the information, making sure we knew where, when these things were found, looking at all the primary resources to make sure that the records were reliable. In the modern day, rare birds attract a lot of people as well, and this is one example of a species called a slaty-legged crate. This one particular individual was photographed by many, many people, posted across many different Facebook sites, and in the middle is a screenshot from the citizen science platform called eBird. You can see that the many blue dots actually refer to one single individual bird. Now the thing is that we know, because we lived through the time, that this many dots and many Facebook posts were actually just one bird. What happens 30 years from now, 50 years from now? People who don't have the context today wouldn't be able to know. They won't be able to tell if the data actually shows just one individual or whether there were 2 or 3 birds just running around at the same time. These were some qualitative information that we felt had to be documented properly as well. On the flip side, there are also other records. This is a particular species called the olive-backed titid, very rare in Singapore, only found by one person and posted in an obscure Facebook page. Again, these links might just disappear. And it is very important that we make sure we document them properly, because if they're gone, they're just lost forever. Again, 30 years from now, 50 years from now, people will never know that these species occurred. We looked through more than 1,000 records. Every single record, we went to the primary source. I visited the library many, many times. I was sick of that place. Searched through many, many Facebook groups, found the links for each of them. We compiled everything, and we created the Singapore Bird database. In our database, we not only include all these records, but also the rationale behind them, the links to the primary resource. It is very important for us to allow people to look at those data and information themselves. We don't want it to be a case where we tell you and you have to believe us just because we think we are better. No. We want to ensure that the community is able to look at the primary sources themselves. When the database was first launched, I have to admit, I was quite worried. I didn't know if it was really worth the effort or not. But the Straits Times covered our database launch, and for me personally, this was a huge moment because finally, I felt like the work I was doing and we were doing as a team were being recognized. We knew that we were contributing to the community. The Straits Times post was also shared by IBIS, which is a journal by the British Ornithological Union, a very prestigious group, and again, we realized that the work that we were doing was actually important. And so at that point, we decided, let's do more. Let's not just do something that's online. We gathered a team of 17 enthusiastic members. Most of us were either undergraduates or fresh grads. We were led by 4 adults, I guess, Francis, Adrian, Cheng Ting, and Richard, who's not here with us today, to guide us along our journey. With this expanded team, we started creating more online resources, more articles to identify difficult things in Singapore, stuff to teach science, more resources that were useful for bird watchers, such as our migrant bar charts. Additionally, we started getting involved in more in real life activities. We've had booths in NTU, we've had booths in Pongo. We've done talks about records keeping, talks about more less sciencey stuff like bird names and folklore. And of course, what's the best way to learn about bird watching? Through walks. So we've also organized walks in collaboration with other organizations and also ourselves. And one of the key events that we've done is the Raptor Watch at Henderson Waves. So around late October to early November, a lot of birds of prey will fly by Singapore. And we decided that it would be a fantastic idea to have a booth over there so that we can teach not just bird watchers, but also members of the public what we were doing. These birds of prey that fly by Henderson Waves are not very easy to identify. So we were there to ensure that the bird watchers who were there would be able to learn how it was like to identify these birds. Apart from just outreach events, we've also been engaged in more, so to speak, serious stuff. So we were invited to a particular conference a few months ago where Movin and I had the opportunity to present about non-native birds in Singapore. We've also had multiple publications about bird identification and ecology of the birds in Singapore. In our personal capacity, we've also been involved in conservation work. Some of us have internships at BirdLife, some of us have had engagements with the National Parks Board, some of us are also members of the Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group. A lot of these works that we've been doing, thankfully, has been picked up by the media as well, but we've had the opportunity to raise awareness to the members of the public through these means. We've been featured by Silver Crease, CNA, where Jen Wei and I were part of a radio show a while ago, and of course the Straits Times. So after all this work, we decided it's time to evolve from the Singapore Birds Project to the Bird Society of Singapore. As a society, we are not just a random collective bunch of peoples. We have a proper structure, we have a constitution, we have an executive committee. It gives us a form of legitimacy in the work that we do. The collaborations that you form with us would be through an official capacity. And of course, when running a society, it's not just like running a website. It shows that we are committed to what we are doing. We need to ensure that we follow all the rules and regulations that we have to do. We need to ensure continuity, and these are things that we will commit to. The objectives of our society is fairly straightforward but difficult to execute. The first is, of course, capacity building. We aim to promote the interest in birds in Singapore and the surrounding region. We believe that by doing that, we can empower the local bird watching scene. We get people involved by helping to prepare contents for us, and through that, we hope to teach people about the birds and hopefully get these people involved in conservation work in the future as well. Science, of course, is a big focus for us. We've done talks, we've had publications, and we hope to take part in more projects, run more projects to learn about the birds in Singapore and again, the region. And of course, conservation. By getting more people involved, by knowing more about the birds, we can be part of the conservation scene in Singapore. We want to ensure that the birds in Singapore are protected properly with proper science. We aim to do this through transparency, inclusiveness, and relevance. We are particularly transparent, especially with regards to our data sharing. So when you look at our records page, you can find out when things have been edited, when things have been updated. These are information that we all include transparently. We are also inclusive. We believe that everyone and anyone can be a bird watcher and an ornithologist, and of course, a conservationist. And of course, relevance. First of all, we'll be making sure that we use the latest scientific knowledge that's in the field, and of course, we want to know what the bird watching community wants so that we can produce resources that we use for the community. So, how can you be part of our journey? As birders, it would be fantastic if you could share your records with our database, especially when you find species that are in our review list. At the same time, if you have any article ideas, please come and share them with us. We'll be happy to discuss, provide resources. These are things that we love to engage in. Asking questions, this is also extremely important. So over here is a screenshot, an example from 2 years back when there were many Himalayan vultures in Singapore. And a very simple question started this article: how many vultures were there even? And so Jen Wei and I did a deep dive into this topic to actually try to track down all the individuals that were found in Singapore, and we wrote an article about that. And most importantly, especially for many of you who are here physically with us, we would like to collaborate with all of you. Scientific projects, community engagement, conservation work. We know that we have the team that have the best expertise of bird knowledge in Singapore, and we hope to work with all of you. Let me ask a very random question. How many of you here are football fans? Not a lot? Arsenal in particular? No? Okay, a handful of people. How many of you here are metal fans? Sorry? Okay, how many of you here love birds? And everyone?
Shit.
Thumbs up, thumbs up. For those of you whose hands are not up, I'll come and look for you later. Now imagine if I did the same poll outside of this room. I will probably be scolded because it's a library. If I do it outside of the library, not many people raise their hands when I ask them whether they are fans of birds or not. The bird watching society is growing, but the reality is that we are still a minority in Singapore. The birding society, people who like herbs, people who like insects, marine stuff, sorry for lumping it into the ecosystem. Basically birds and bird food. It's a small community, but the work that we do is extremely important. It's not like watching football games or going for metal concerts. The work that we do matters. We are the ones who protect nature, we are the ones who protect the very thing that humanity needs for survival. And that's why our work matters. The society will be led by these following members. I don't think I have time to introduce all of them, but I hope all of you get to mingle with our key members here. Hong Yao is not with us here physically, but I think he's watching somewhere. Hi, Hong Yao. Our team is very vibrant. Here's an example of something we did in April's Food. We changed out a whole bunch of bird species on our website to cute drawings. We put that on Instagram, and I think it was quite a big hit. Many of you who are here also participated in this online event where we just drew random birds and posted it on Instagram. We enjoy birds, we like to have fun, and that's what working with us will be like. We are vibrant, we have a lot of ideas, and we're a fun bunch to work with, but at the same time, we know how to be serious. Now, throughout my talk, I've shared my story, I've shared the Singapore Birds Project story, the Bird Society story, but each of you here have your own bird-watching story. Some of them have been shared in our blog posts. One of them is by Keita, a student's big year, another one, once-in-a-lifetime experience by someone who found a great great slaty woodpecker in Singapore Botanic Gardens last year. These are stories that we hope to continue telling. But in order to tell these stories, we need more people involved. The community is extremely important. Secondly, science is extremely important. To tell stories, we need to know about these things. And lastly, we need to conserve the birds. By making sure that they're around, we can continue to tell the stories together. This picture of a stalk-billed kingfisher changed my life. And the Bird Society of Singapore is here to change all of your lives. Thank you.
We hope all of you will work alongside us as we embark on a new chapter as the Bird Society of Singapore. Okay, next up, we'll be having talks on the intimate relationship about the intimate relationship we have with birds, bird conservation in Singapore, and how the society will contribute to it. But before that, we'll be having a short 10-minute break. Please be back. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this exciting event. I'm unfortunately unable to join you, and I send my apologies. I'm really excited to see the launch of the Bird Society of Singapore, and I send you and your team my congratulations. It is my pleasure to have known and worked with so many of you, all passionate and talented ornithologists and conservationists in various capacities, especially Movin, Jingying, and Zachary. I wish you success with your work, and I very much look forward to working with you to protect and to document Singapore's avifauna through even more collaborations going forward, and especially through the work that we are doing through the Nature Society, BirdLife International, and the Oriental Bird Club. See you soon, see you in the field, and let's save some birds.
Has spearheaded countless initiatives, such as our collaboration with NLB's Green Market earlier this year and our crowd favorite raptor booth at Henderson Waves. Meanwhile, sitting on the Singapore Birds Record Committee, Jen Wei has improved our Singapore Birds checklist and is one of our science-based arbitrators who evaluates the status of our rare birds. With their wealth of experience, you would not have guessed that they are still undergraduates at NUPU. They will be discussing with us the intimate relationship we have with birds. Over to you.
Thank you, Keita, for expanding on the phrase that BirdSoc will change your life. And now I'll run it across a different tangent. How have birds changed our lives? And why should you, all of you sitting here and listening online, care about birds? So, to give some context, modern birds existed 60 million years ago, which is ages before our modern humans with our amazing brains came to be, which is just around 100,000 years ago. And birds have always been intimately linked with mankind, with the first man-made depiction of birds dating back to 16,000 to 14,000 BCE in the caves of Lascaux, France. And in this cave painting, you can see a mysterious man that seems to have a bird-like head. Some think that this man could be a shaman, enraptured in trance. Some don't know for sure. But isn't this cryptic and ancient? But not all depictions of birds have to be centuries old and ancient. And you know that you can find hints of the influence of birds all across Singapore, all around you. So, welcome to our presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Zachary. And we'll be taking a trip across Singapore to answer a few questions. Why birds? And what are their relevance to us Singaporeans? So, to set some groundwork, to answer these questions and for the sake of simplicity, we will choose three main racial groups in Singapore, namely, of course, the CMIO, Chinese, Malay, and Indian, and explore what birds mean in these individual cultures, everyday objects, texts, and even places across Singapore. So let's start a bit with my own culture, the Chinese culture. So, at a glance, these objects look kind of different, don't they? Teapots, paintings, and decorations. But they're all renditions of the flower and bird painting called Huan Yao Hua. And so flower and bird paintings originated in the 10th century in the Tang Dynasty, with this art form spreading from China to countries like Japan and Korea. And interestingly, this art form includes a key subfield of philosophical aesthetics called environmental aesthetics. And one tenet includes the aesthetic experience, which is a subjective and emotional response we have in engaging with the environment, which may involve feelings of beauty, or tranquility, or stimulation, just like all the feelings that you feel when white-bellied seagull dives for fish in daybreak. And thank you, Movin. This is found in Movin's house. It's all around you. And let's unpack the modern rendition of this art form through an old story from the Jin Dynasty. So, for thousands of years, the Chinese have been fond of pine trees for its resilience to harsh conditions and its longevity. And behind the stone house grew a lonely pine of 33 meters high. A couple lived there and enjoyed the longevity of several hundred years. And after their death, they reincarnated into a pair of twins that circled this very same pine tree as a sign of their everlasting love for each other. And the longevity of a pine and the love that cranes symbolize may mean close to little individually, but when put together they do mean a lot. And this can tell stories that transcend just illustrations alone. And much like how art and stories can tell us about the perspectives that our ancestors have had with birds, so can simple things like proverbs. So in Malay culture, there are many, many proverbs, some of which talk about birds. And have you ever used a simile in primary school? Does anyone have? Yeah. Thanks, guys. So I felt like a genius when I used many similes in my comprehension of like top class, language A class. But an example of a simile would just basically be as wise as an owl. So an owl is correlated to wise, right? And much like that, Malay proverbs also ascribe character traits to birds, with a multitude of them being present in this table here. And so let's talk about one Malay proverb specifically that surrounds the burung pipit. Now you may think that the burung pipit is in fact a pipit. Like the paddy field pipit, a ground-feeding insectivore that inhabits open grass patches in Singapore in areas like Jurong, Lake Gardens, and Marina East Drive. Well, the burung pipit is not a pipit, it's an astrobit. So the white-ground monia, like something like white-ground monia. And these monias have robust bills that they employ to feed on grains and seeds. And in many Malay proverbs, the burung pipit is a depiction of the common man. They see someone that's hardworking, yet weak and poor, like myself, as a student, very poor. And in many proverbs, the word pipit is used to exemplify these differences between social status and power. And through looking at the frequency of use of these proverbs, we can tell ourselves and inform ourselves more on how the prevailing time is like. And so the relationships that birds and our cultures still just don't stop there. And they manifest strongly in religions, most evidently in Hinduism. And so this place, some of you guys may be aware of it, it's located near Bugis MRT at Waterloo Street, and it's called the Sri Krishna Temple, which is dedicated to Sri Krishna, the eighth avatar of Vishnu. And Vishnu's divine mount, or divine vehicle, is Garuda, a divine being that's on the left, standing beside the doorway. Some may think that Garuda could be the crested serpent eagle, some may think that it could be an action stalk, some may think that it could be the Brahmini kite, but nonetheless, this sheds some light on the manifestation of the divine in nature. And Hinduism sees the divine manifested in every natural force, every natural process, every organism, and the Hindu cosmos comes alive with deities, expressing their intentions with natural phenomena like earth, fire, rain, water, and wind. And forests are seen as abodes of divine beings, deities, sages, and the woods around the villages are considered sacred groves. And interestingly, bird trapping in Hindu states is virtually non-existent due to this very degree of reverence to birds. And so we've learned about the significance of some of the cultural elements and its intimate relationships with birds, exploring our mixed heritages and the common experience we share as Singaporeans. But there is still one. Birds have affected our lives for thousands of years and continue to affect our lives now, making us wake up at ungodly times in the morning, making us shout where in the field until you're so annoyed, and also making us gather in a place that's faster than mob manning that the army does. And it's time for us to shift gears once more to the experience that most of us here share, bird watching.
Yeah, thank you, Zachary. So I'm Jen Wei, and now that Zachary has shared more about why birds are important to us culturally, let's look at something more modern. How bird watching in Singapore has changed in recent years, and how BirdSoc fits into the picture. So like Zachary said, the most obvious change is that there are so many bird watchers nowadays. I'm sure many of us will be familiar with scenes like this, when huge crowds gathered for the Great Statey Woodpecker at Botanic Gardens in 2023. But it didn't always used to be like this. We didn't always used to have so many bird watchers. This explosion of interest in bird watching and bird photography in Singapore is a fairly recent thing, partly because of COVID. And nowadays, bird-related news is increasingly showing up in mainstream media, and membership in Facebook groups like bird sightings have quadrupled since I joined in 2019. Today, we have over 18,000 members. So yeah, lots of bird watchers nowadays compared to previously. The demographic of bird watchers is also changing. Increasingly, we have more and more young people and new birders. They offer new skills and perspectives. And today, with us in the audience, we actually have several members and leaders of youth-led environmental organizations and interest groups. And in fact, our founding team at BirdSoc is also mostly comprised of youth. The way we go about birding nowadays has also changed. So this is a Facebook post by our founding member Francis, talking about how it used to be a major accomplishment to reach the milestone of 300 birds in Singapore. Considering today we only have 427 species on our bird list, that's an amazing feat. By his estimate in 2011, only 8 to 10 people had reached this milestone, some of them taking more than 20 years to do so. Nowadays, considering we only have 427 species, 300 is still a major milestone. But what has changed is the speed. Thousands of people in Facebook groups and Telegram groups means that news gets spread so fast nowadays, and there's a huge community effort to share knowledge. Just last year, our friend CN, he actually managed to see 302 birds in just 1 year. Compare that to 2011 when some people took more than 20 years. He did it in 1 year. It's the first time anybody has done so, and it's only possible, of course, because of his effort, but also because there are so many eyes searching for rare birds, and news travels so fast nowadays. So the locations for bird watching have also changed. In recent years, we lose access to some birding hotspots like near Dew Harvest Lake. Back in the day, it was an amazing place for migrants and rare western breeders like the white-browed crake. But now it has made way for a farm, and we can't access these birding places anymore. We also have all these long-gone hotspots like Senoko, Changi Cove, and Tanah Merah shown here. So this is a description about Tanah Merah from Singapore Before Night in 2000. At the right time, you can see a few thousand waders, herons, and egrets feeding or roosting in the reed-dominated marsh. And on Christmas of 1999, we even had one of the rarest shorebirds in the region, the spoon-billed sandpiper, turn up there. Nowadays, it's difficult to find this kind of suitable habitat, let alone thousands of shorebirds in it. And the spoon-billed sandpiper hasn't been seen in Singapore since. But at the same time, we have also gained some new places to go bird watching. Marina East Drive is a place that has only fairly recently blown up in popularity, but species-wise, at least on eBird, is already one of the top hotspots. And this list of birds seen there includes some incredibly rare birds like Siberian house martin, our first ever common starling, and most recently the pied stilts. Another such example is Jurong Lake Gardens. Again, a fairly recent development. It's not really like our forests or nature reserves, and yet some incredibly rare birds like black-necked monarch and Chinese blackbird have appeared there. So yes, we lose access to some birding hotspots, but we also gain some back. It's always changing. Besides locations, the birds we get in Singapore have also changed. For a lot of people who only recently started birding, like me, the grey-headed songhen is a mythical creature, a rare Pokemon. More or less it's vanished, last seen in 2018 at the Kranji Marshes. But you hear stories from all the experienced birders and lao jiaos about how they used to be bao jiak one, sure get one as long as you're at Kranji Marsh early enough in the morning. But obviously that isn't the case anymore. So on the other hand, we also have birds that used to be very rare that are doing well nowadays. The crested gosok. It used to be a rare sight, and in 1987, when a nesting pair was first discovered at the Botanic Gardens, it was a big deal. But now, like the photo on the left, you can just see it perching in the middle of the void deck. Yeah, so they are increasingly urban, and we even have regular nesting at Pasir Ris Park. Another similar bird is the lesser achuton. Our first ever record was in 1999. And up to as recently as a few years ago, you used to need to take a boat all the way up to the northwestern coast of Singapore just to get a chance to see them. But now, they are increasingly getting more and more common at Sungai Buloh, and there's even evidence of possible nest building. So yes, we also get more and more new national first records every year, and when you put all of these changes together, it means that our species list is constantly growing and changing. And it's because of all this change that it's important to keep track of it, not only for science, but also to inspire us to take action and protect what we have. So yes, constantly changing landscape of birds and locations is important to document and keep accurate and accessible records. And that is one of the things that we at BirdSoc are offering you. So what actually does BirdSoc bring to the table for Singaporean birding? So for the average birder who might want to know more about our birds, or the birds that everybody is chasing, we have species pages for every species in Singapore, and we keep these quickly and accurately updated. See, for example, the black-headed ibis on the left, we first record for Singapore was on the 1st of November in 2022 last year. Within 1 day, we had already put out the species page for it. And thereafter, the records committee took about a month to research and deliberate on the record, and on 4th December, we finalized our decision on its addition to the Singapore Birds Checklist. And on 10th December, we published a full write-up with all the details. You can see it on the right. So like Keita mentioned, we are very transparent about the whole process, and the whole timeline, all the information, all the dates, you can find it on our database. Our more sciencey content could also raise awareness on what birds we could potentially be on the lookout for. So here's an example. In January last year, we put out an article about identifying the flycatchers of Singapore. But our authors also included one more section about one other possibility, and that's brown-breasted flycatcher. And as we now know, 9 months later in October, we actually did have our first brown-breasted flycatcher turn up at Dairy Farm. And the same thing happened with black-backed swordman, different from gray-headed swordman. But we posted an article about the possibility of them turning up. And not long later, one turned up at Changi Business Park. And this prompted us to check, are there any other old records that could actually be black-backed swarmhen and not grey-headed swarmhen? And we did find one in Kranji Marshes in 2016. Again, that's why it's important to keep records. So I'm not implying that we at BirdSoc actively predicted these appearances, or that the original finders of these rare birds identified them based on our articles. Of course not, but it does show that the information we put out can give readers a better idea of what to look out for, and more importantly, it shows that the info we put out is accurate. We're not talking out of our ass. So for something even more scientific than the wish list, we also had a Birding Asia article about how eruptions of cinereous bulbus and street bulbus coincided with the appearance of other sparsely recorded Sundaic birds like yellow-vented flowerpecker or green broadbill. So we noticed that just as these rare bulbus turn up, so do these other rare Sundaic birds. And because we keep detailed records of all of these rare bird sightings, we can put them all into a chart and notice that they do spike at the same time. There's a real trend here. So this is the full list of all the birds. It's too big to even fit on the slide, but yeah, anyone can make the link that some years you see more birds than others, some years are more productive than others. But with our database, we can actually quantify it. We can list out all of these rare bird sightings to point out that, hey, there is a correlation here and maybe we should be paying more attention to it. But not everybody's interested in science. So again, what does this mean for the average birder? When you identify these trends, it helps people know when to look to get their birds. When these rare bulbus turn up, maybe you can be on the lookout for these other rare birds. But it also shows that there are tangible ways that submitting records to us or other sites can contribute to science in a very real way. And in turn, this helps us and other researchers make even more discoveries. So it's a very positive feedback loop. So when the overall level of knowledge of the community increases, everyone benefits from it. And in fact, we at BirdSoc have also benefited from past efforts at records keeping. So while most of our modern records are personally collated through social media or eBird or through our own submission portal, a lot of our old records in our database are from old bird reports like Singapore Alifauna, Oriental Bird Club, and so many other old texts and publications that we had to personally go through. And all of these information and records and publications are still good sources of information, but just like everything else that is changing about bird watching, so too is records keeping, and we believe that we can add value to these external records. So this is how. Again, we go back to the spoon-billed sandpiper sighting from Tanah Merah, because if you talk about it enough, maybe another one will come back. But yeah, so this is the original report as it appeared in Singapore Avifauna in year 2000, as well as some personal correspondence emails about the rare bird sighting. So while the information is there, it's difficult to find for someone or a researcher looking for all the sightings of spoon-billed sandpiper in Singapore. It can be difficult to find because they are just scans. You can't control F search for spoon-billed sandpiper and find all of them. No, you have to go through them one by one. It's tedious. So what our tech wizard Raghav did is he ran all of these scans through optical character recognition to digitize them into text and tag each sighting with a date and a location. And then he put all of them to eBird. And from eBird, we further transpose them into our database, where they can now be organized by all the sighting details. And we also provide our committee's view on the sighting in case that there are any conflicting reports. And of course, references back to the original text so that anybody can go and check them for themselves. So we may not have had a part to play in the original record, but we improve it by making it more accessible for other bird watchers and other scientists. So the result of all our hard work is a relevant, transparent, and freely accessible database that is backed up by science. On top of that, we also have our other events like scientific articles, monthly roundups, community written articles, bar charts, bird lists, too many to list, honestly. Keita has also talked about our community efforts, Henderson Wade's Raptor Watch, and Movin will talk more later about our conservation efforts. So amidst all of this stuff that is changing about bird watching in Singapore, we see this is why records keeping is important. We see that when the community works together, we can achieve great things. We see that even though BirdSoc is a very young team, we have things to offer to you as well. And this is what we are offering to you, the community. So please give us your confidence and your support. Hope to see you out in the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen Wei and Zachary. Moving on, we are saved the best for the last. Mr. Movin Nyanyasegaran, our resident mega nerd, is the Vice President of the Society and also a member of the Singapore Bird Watch Committee. Movin is a multi-talented individual who is an expert on various taxa, including freshwater fauna and birds. You may recognize his name from the local news, as Movin regularly commentates on local biodiversity related news. In his personal capacity, Movin is a PhD student at NUS. Over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming in. Thanks Ying for that really nice introduction. So first of all, you guys had a lot of really interesting talks today, and it's going to be like, ooh, we're going to be talking about conservation, which is just factual, but it's okay, that's a cool. So first of all, this is the pink-necked green pigeon, which isn't a conservation-threatened species in Singapore, but it is our logo, and therefore it is on our slide for this presentation. But first, before we talk about conservation in present-day Singapore, we need to talk about the past, because what happened in the past influences the present. And so this is a vegetation map of primeval Singapore. It's mainly lowland dipterocarp forests, some freshwater swamp forests, as well as mangrove forests. When Raffles came to Singapore in 1819, this is not what he saw. Basically, by the 1820s, about 20% of Singapore's land area had already been cleared for plantations, and just to provision the people living there with food. And by the 1850s, plantations had become big money in Singapore, and it was mainly Gambia and pepper, like the stuff on the left, as well as paddy fields, like the map on the right side. And by 1882, it was found that only 7% of our natural forests remain. And so when I did some digging, I found this out. This is actually very surprising for me personally, because I thought that urbanization was really what threw up all our forests. But it turns out that our forests had been limited in scope for a long, long time. And most of our forests were actually cleared by burning. And this burning was so commonplace. It's not a sunset or a sunrise. This is actually a forest on fire, by the way, guys. So this is actually captured in an oil painting from 1876. This was commonplace enough, and this was surely a part of the landscape at the time. However, having said that, Singapore was also a big place for natural history. The British who came were very keen collectors and very keen on understanding and documenting and collating, cataloging natural history. And because of their efforts, we have a really, really good understanding of the birds that were in Singapore that aren't here now. And so these are specimens that are from the museum. The one on top is the green broadbill. We see it once in a while in Movin. Those are probably visitors, but previously they used to have a resident breeding population in Singapore. And this bird, actually, if you look at the label, is actually from woodlands. Right? And there's no suitable habitat for that right now in woodlands at all. But this gives us a little bit of the context for what has been lost. And the one below is the black and red broadbill. And black and red broadbill is a bird that we are seeing a little bit more and more nowadays in Pulau Ubin. And true enough, interestingly enough, these old records are also from Pulau Ubin. So, in 1882, when Matthew Cantley found out there was only 7% of natural forest left in Singapore, he immediately was like, okay guys, we need to have proper protected areas so that we conserve what we have left. So he suggested these 15 forest reserves to be protected. However, these were gazetted at the time, but very soon after they were de-gazetted because it was thought that, oh, actually it's just 7% of the land area, to protect that much native biodiversity, and there was a lot of encroachment that was happening. And then beyond that, there was also a lot of desire from people who were building plantations, like we want these areas to make more money. And so they were de-gazetted. But over time, eventually, as a nation, as a country, we got our stuff together and we designated these proper nature areas. Primarily at first they were for water catchment, so they were actually concentrated along our big, massive central reservoirs. So that's why you get the McRitchie and all of those other big, that's basically central catchment nature reserves now, and the Bukit Timah area. And over time, there were more areas that were sort of like seen to be, these are valuable areas and we're going to protect that as well. But those were generally the additions. So at its heart, Singapore basically has its forests because all of our forests are really concentrated right in the middle. Another threat to biodiversity at the time, long time ago, was actually the wildlife trade. Again, we look at art to find out a little bit more about what was going on at the time. These are depictions of just a portion of a portrait, actually, of someone selling birds at the ports in Singapore in the 1890s. And you might think like, hey, collection can't be that big of a problem, but actually it was. So in the last 6 months of 1883, 20,000 birds were collected from Singapore to be sent to Europe as museum schemes. I don't even know that 20,000 birds at Bukit Timah right now. And these were collected by a single person. So that makes it even worse. The scale of it is staggering. And this actually resulted in the local law enforcement administration to decide, like, we're going to have the first wildlife laws for the country. And this resulted in the Wild Birds Protection Ordinance in 1884. And this anecdote is precisely the reason that was cited in the document. So this is actually from that document where this is the reason why that we're going to have this ordinance, right? And this is Singapore's first wildlife law. So we have birds to thank for what eventually evolved into the Wildlife Act now. Eventually other non-bird animals were put in as well. And we have that, we have birds to thank for. There's one guy to thank for our wildlife laws actually, in a weird way. Yeah. And so the original bird ordinance prevented the you need a permit to collect birds basically, wild birds basically. And now we move much further into much closer to the present. In 1986, Singapore actually signed on to be a signatory of the IUCN, so the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which means that we do not allow the illegal trade, the illegal international trade of endangered birds and plants through our borders. And so on the right side, you can actually see two birds that are actually quite highly traded in the region. The one below is kind of the poster child for wildlife trade in Singapore. And around this is called a straw-headed bulbul. It's a bird that has probably its major stronghold population in Singapore now, and a lot of the populations elsewhere are just not doing as well. And the white-tongued Sharma is a bird that is highly traded to the extent that we think that most of the birds in the mainland of Singapore are actually derived from escaped populations. Right? The provenance of them is actually mainly from escapees, whereas the ones on Pulau Ubin are more likely to be 100% pure. So that just gives us an understanding of these birds are traded so much that the entire population in the place that we are at now is actually from overseas. And of course, in the late 80s and the early 90s, there was a push to actually protect nature in a more complete and more comprehensive way in Singapore. So Richard Hale was a bird watcher, and he came to the west side of Singapore and discovered this mud flats and mangroves were completely swarming with birds. And then he indicated this to members in, at the time, the Malay Nature Society, now members of NSS as well as the late Subaraj, who came together and really lobbied the government, and there was also a lot of government support for this as well, eventually, and it resulted in the formation of Sungai Buloh Wetland Reserve. So this is a little bit about the history of conservation and birds in Singapore, right? But also we have a lot of threats that we do face right now. So of course, Singapore, land scarce, urbanization, we always need more and more places for housing. So habitat loss is always going to be a problem. Even in these areas of older secondary forests that we have, a lot of them will be cleared eventually to make way for urban landscapes, and more urban structures and a more urban matrix of people living. We also have the wildlife trade, which I guess is not as pronounced in Singapore as it is in many other countries, but we do have like species that are highly sought after for the trade in Singapore, like for example, the straw-headed bulbul. We also have poor data and shifting baselines. And the bird I'm going to use here to illustrate that is actually the chestnut-winged babbler, which is a bird that you often hear more than see in the central catchment nature reserves. 20 odd years ago, you would have heard it in Bukit Timah, so many of the older bird watchers in the room would actually have had the chance to detect that in Bukit Timah as well. Contrary to popular belief, I was not around then. I was not bird watching then. So I do not know about this. And me as a younger bird watcher, I would just think that this bird was always been restricted to central catchment nature reserves and not really known from Bukit Timah until we look at records and we understand that actually, if we look at the long-term trajectory of these populations, there has been not only a decline, but a contraction in the range as well. And then last fall, we're going to come to a thing that we don't really know that much about, which is the impact of alien and potentially invasive birds in Singapore. The bird here is actually golden back weaver, which is an African weaver that has become well established in parts of Singapore. So, what are we doing as a society for this? Well, some of us were involved in the Singapore Terrestrial Conservation Plan, which is going to be published later this year, and then we did talk about prioritizing specific habitats for birds that are not part of the protected area landscape. So these two birds, the long-tailed parakeet and the common hill myna, are not birds that need pristine, amazing forests to survive, but they do need tall forests, basically. And the long-tailed parakeet is considered globally vulnerable, and the common hill myna is a major target of the wild bird trade and is losing ground because of that. So prioritizing some of these species and sort of figuring out which non-protected areas should be prioritized, be kept as long as possible, was part of the exercise that we were involved in. Addressing the wildlife trade, some of us are members of the, as Keita has already mentioned, the Asian Songbird Trade Specialist Group, which has a regional focus, and one of the birds that is one of the focal birds of that is the great greedy bird, which is doing all right in Singapore, I guess. And the other one is the strong-headed bulbul working group, which has a more local focus, and it's really about boosting the populations of local populations of strong-headed bulbul so that they can do as well as possible. And records keeping. So I think I want to bore you with the same details that like Keita and Jen Wei talked about, but to me, records keeping is like it's nice to have new records for Singapore, right? But it's also beyond that, and also kind of like there is a conservation element to that. When we want to do bird surveys or we want to detect animals and understand how common they are, we tend to do things like transects or point counts. We do this in these standardized ways. But for things that are really, 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 really rare, it's difficult to detect them when we do these methods, right? So what we rely on then is really about getting these isolated records and looking at them holistically in a long term and seeing what is the pattern, where are these records coming from, what is the trajectory of the population going. And that is the best way for us to sort of understand these things. And what that also tells us is whether a bird is still breeding in Singapore, whether it is just visiting Singapore. So for example, like these two birds, the white-bellied woodpecker and the scarlet minivet, this is a female which is white as yellow, the males are scarlet, I promise. They are birds that used to breed in Singapore, and we have a generally good understanding in terms of records about how their populations have crashed and eventually dwindled into disappearing. But every so often from Johor, we do get the errant individual that does turn up once in a while. But you see, without looking at these records properly, we might think like, oh, these are just really, really, really rare populations of those birds that are still breeding in Singapore. And therefore, when we want to expend conservation resources or prioritize these things, we would be like, oh, these two birds are really rare, and we want to prioritize them. But if they don't have breeding populations here, then one thing we need to know is that maybe we don't prioritize these birds in terms of conservation, but we look at birds that are rare that we know are still breeding on. So for example, some of the babblers and things like that. So that would be one of the benefits of records keeping as well. And last of all, we are also making a list to document the presence, like which species of alien birds are present in Singapore, and also sort of like the locations that they're coming from. We're hoping that this database will be extremely useful in terms of conservation in the long term. And so next step, so what do we want to do now that we have formally formed the society? Well, I guess the most obvious thing that we really are keen to do is to sort of be involved in some of the consultations for environmental impact assessments in cities, and to sort of like give this feedback from a bird-centric lens. You know that it's something that isn't always present in many of these consultations, and that's definitely something that we would be very keen to provide. And also, I think this is kind of beating the dead horse at this point, but we are really, really keen to collaborate for research. Right, so any organizations that have a research focus or want to learn more about birds in Singapore, the picture here is a pair of red Keita bats, which are basically non-native birds in Singapore. And like, you know, I'm just using it as a placeholder for things that we really don't know much about, right? Which is the impact of alien birds in Singapore, for instance. And to really get a sense of like, so we're really keen to collaborate, learn more about birds, and anyone who wants to partner up with us to, you know, like join forces to learn more and discover more about birds, we'd be really, really keen to work with you guys. And so, last things, how can you all contribute? Please submit your records to us, and please, join us in some of our walks. We're planning to have bird sensors and teach people more about the birds and just in your area and stuff. So people who are just keen to learn more about birds, spread the awareness, like to sort of spread this awareness of birds to the greater public, and to sort of allow people to have greater appreciation for all of these things. That's all things that everyone in this room can contribute to. And with that, I'm going to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Movin. We have now heard from our speakers about the history and goals of our society, how our society can help individual birders, as well as how we can contribute to bird conservation in Singapore. They will now take the stage for our question and answer segment where you, the audience, and also viewers joining us live on YouTube, can take the opportunity to explore these topics further. I'll be handing over to our moderators, Raga and Colin, for this section.
Thank you, Cheng Teng, for the introduction. I'm sure many of us have burning questions for our presenters, and in this Q&A session, we'll be opening the floor to your questions. If you are joining us in the Central Library, please raise your hand, and Geraldine will come to you with a wireless mic for you to share your question.
If you are joining us from online, please scan the QR code on the screen or go to birdsociety.sg/Q&A/ and submit your questions via the form. I will be reading your question on your behalf.
If anyone in the in-person audience would like to use the online form instead, you can do so. Before we start our Q&A, our president, Mr. Keita Sin, has a few words on membership in our society.
So yes, membership. Okay. Many of you are probably keen to find out how you could join us. So right now at this point, we are focusing on rolling out of our signature programs involving our membership to the public. But we're at the same time recruiting passionate members who share values with us and we can work together as a team. So membership is not open to the public at this point, but if you're keen on working for the community with us, please get in touch with us so that we can discuss our ideas and projects. And these are things that we will be very happy to talk with all of you about. Yeah, so that's all regarding membership, and let's start the Q&A now.
We can start with the Q&A.
Hi, thank you so much to the speakers for sharing. My question is Okay, my question is how does the Bird Society of Singapore expand upon what the Singapore Birds Project was already doing? For example, will there be new events or more partnerships, for example? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for that question. That's a really interesting question because a lot of the things that we do talk about are sort of like involved intricately with like the Singapore Birds Project as well. Okay. Okay, it's working. Okay, with no feedback now. So I think. Is this one better? Okay, great. Okay, so basically, one thing that we realized is that for partnerships, especially, it's easier for overseas partners or like conservation organizations, like NGOs, things like that, to partner with the society rather than with like a loose group of individuals, which is what the Birds Project would have been seen like at the time. And that's really why we decided to formalize this whole thing as a society, like by and large. And it also gives us more reach and more expansion and more ability to do more projects that we'd be interested in as well.
Hi, thank you so much for that. I'm asking on behalf of, I guess, other civil society groups as well. You mentioned that you're keen on doing research and outreach and education, but is there anything else, like for us in civil society, how is it that we can, I guess, build your capacity and our capacity better through collaboration? What do you guys think the way forward is for that? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. So first of all, we are, just to reiterate, we are very, very keen to work with all of these groups here. Second of all, the main thing here is that I think having joint events might be really fun, actually. Like doing things together might be really, really fun. Like I think for us, we bring a very bird-focused sort of like energy or expertise to things that we do, of course. But it's also kind of nice to know that we don't live in just a world with just birds, right? We also live in a world with birds. There's also like other aspects of like nature around us, like things like plants, understanding. And there are very many aspects of this. It's sort of like bringing in this lens to all the activities that we can do together. I think would be very, very exciting for me. So even if like just off the top of my head, like things like we do a HEB walk, right? Or we do like sometimes but the focus is food plants. We bring in an aspect of like what food plants are important to plants and things like that. So things of that nature where we can really collaborate and build on each other's strengths would be very, very exciting.
We can talk about which snakes eat birds and which birds eat which snakes.
Alright, we have an online question from Anonymous. Will BirdSoc SG be partnering with policymakers in conservation in any capacity? For example, conducting impact assessment for areas slated for development.
Yes. Yeah, we would definitely be super keen to work on these events. So, and thanks if you're watching. Yes. So yeah, we believe that we have the expertise to assess the avifauna in Singapore and advise regarding which places should be developed and protected, and environmental impact assessments as well, engagements as well. These are definitely places where we would want to collaborate with policymakers. So yeah, please get in touch with us definitely.
And just to cite, big to point out, generally impact assessments themselves will not involve nature groups or conservation societies, right? So what will probably be involved in more deeply is really sort of like the engagement after these reports are out and advising on things like mitigation and things like that, and how to best optimize these things.
The next question will be from our in-person audience. We ask that you share your name for your questions. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tyrion, and a lot of the work that I do actually is more in the climate change space. So my question to BirdSoc is more of biodiversity and climate change are things that are interlinked, and oftentimes we also don't see efforts together to tackle, let's say, a lot of the plans that the government might be making, or any kind of urbanization plans with any private sector parties. How do you see BirdSoc working with climate groups in order to advance certain things that will both protect biodiversity and also reduce the impacts of climate change?
That's a really good question. Okay, so I think, speaking from my experience with like just general advocacy in Singapore, climate groups and biodiversity groups tend to be in different silos. Like there's very little overlap or sort of interaction between the two. Do I think that it has to be that way? No, definitely not. Really should not. There is a big overlap, and there's a lot of ways that we can sort of dovetail each other's efforts, right? At the same time, I think that the directions in which our advocacy proceeds is also very different. And I think that means that people from these groups do need to sit down, talk, and come up with a clear direction about how we can sort of like bring these efforts together. Because as it is now, I think the overlap is very little, right? So the idea is, how do we build this? And I think the only way that we can build this is by talking to each other and really understanding each other and sort of getting a sense of like, what do we all want? And sort of like what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, and how we can support each other through that.
Is there a question from our in-person audience?
Hi, Keita, Movin. My name is Morgan Strange. I was involved in the Nature Society of Singapore for many years, including part of the executive committee. So now that you are a society, you moved into the society space, do you have any ambition? Keita says you're not looking to expand your membership, but do you have any ambition to use this new status as a society to maybe improve your finances? Are you fundraising? Secondly, do you have ambition to have an office or have staff, a membership officer, or are you, for the time being, just happy cruising on as a sort of expanded online project? This new status as a society, how will it change you?
Money. So, we don't need money. And, as a society, that's one of the big aspects that we have to look at finances. Even running our database alone costs quite a lot of money. And definitely one of the ways that we hope that we can get this done is through fundraising, through donations from members. That's definitely something we're hoping to look at. With regards to physical space, having an office, we haven't really considered that yet, although, as a society, when we register, we need to have a proper address, so we do have that in our constitution. And yeah, membership, right now, we are not planning to make it a public recruitment yet, but if people are keen and have similar goals and values, definitely we will be very happy to have discussions. So I hope that answers the question.
Alright, we have another online question from Herman Hua. So there are still instances of poaching happening here in Singapore. He would like to know, will the Bird Society be involved in any advocacy for greater enforcement of the law?
Okay, so I think the laws in Singapore have recently been changed, and that's definitely important. And I guess like some of our members were involved in that. Having said that, it's very difficult, I think, for a society to be involved in sort of like enforcement of laws. You get what I mean? In the sense that, like, I guess Harman's not physically present, but like, yeah, it's very difficult for society to be sort of involved in the enforcement of laws. I mean, I think the best enforcement officers that we have in Singapore are really the aunties and uncles that are in the park all the time, right? And if they see any poaching, they're going to be like, hey, what are you doing? You know what I mean? As a society, we don't have as much reach as members of the public who use these spaces day to day, right? And so these are the people who are really going to involve the authorities to sort of get stuff done. As a society, what we might be able to do is raise awareness of these things happening, right? So that more people, more aunties and uncles know that this is a problem. And so if they see it, they can report. So I guess that's probably going to be what our angle would be, rather than like say really campaigning to like, oh, you know, you need to increase the laws, you need to increase the severity of these things. I think the best way is to raise awareness amongst the public to know that this is a problem, and then sort of that itself sort of empowers members of the public to do something about it, right?
And so at the same time, although we won't be the ones down there doing the enforcement, as Benjamin has shared, some of us were involved in commenting about laws regarding these poaching events in Singapore. So that's an angle that we definitely want to be involved in as well. But yeah, if you see any poachers, be safe, of course, number one, take photos, videos, and please report them to the National Parks Board. These photos and videos that you take are extremely important, especially if you have concrete evidence of the poaching events happening. But be safe.
Hi, I'm Anuj. I think it's going to be a bit of a strange question, but first of all, congratulations, a lot of you're in our society, and I'm really happy that the society is so youth-driven. Really a positive sign, and I'm just contrasting that with some of the other societies and bird groups that have a more grey-haired membership. So, I mean, when I was younger, 15 years ago, I started this, and I was asking the same question myself: where is my place, right? And now that I'm getting gray hair, a lot of gray hairs, I'm sort of figuring out where is my place, and for others that are in my generation, where is this place? So if you could talk a little bit about more about how do you want to engage people across different generations?
I don't see any gray hair. Still very youthful. So it is true right now most of our members are young. We do have 4 more senior members who are guiding us along, and we definitely want to tap on the expertise of people who are seniors as well. So some of you might be older, but might have fewer bird watching experience. Even then, you have a lot of expertise that we don't. And these are aspects that we really want to learn from you, especially because many of us come from a more science background, so we were from life science or environmental studies, and there are many other things in the world that we definitely don't know about. So those are definitely areas that we have a lot to learn from, and we hope to get other generations to help out with. And another thing is that we definitely rely a lot on the expertise of the more experienced bird watchers. So as Jen Wei shared earlier on about many of the records in Singapore, a lot of the things that have changed, we have not seen them, but we've only read them. Movin has also talked about the shifting baseline syndrome. We haven't actually experienced the declines in some of those species in Singapore, and as those are also parts that we definitely want to learn from and engage with more experienced senior members. So with regards to how we would be doing that, I think as I shared earlier on, membership right now is not public yet, but we would definitely be super keen to have discussions, talk about projects that we could work on together, and hopefully it could be all of us and join this journey as a society.
We also have Jen Wei and Zachary here to answer questions about their presentations. So they are really happy to answer any questions you have about their very interesting presentations as well, besides our president and vice president.
Hello, hi, I'm Atto. Okay. There's this very mystifying place called Kranji Marsh, but not the real one, which is exclusively perhaps for NParks people. The Kranji Marsh that we have access to has 2 mediocre heights, which is restricted, which is blocked. There's really nothing much to see there. My hope is that the Bird Society can work with NParks to make Kranji Marsh, the real Kranji Marsh, more accessible to people like us. We believe there's a purpose on, and then open to us and we'll find out.
So to put things into context for some of you who have not been to Kranji Marshes yet, there is a restricted section in the Kranji Marsh area. You can't just go in, or you can, but that's possible. And And Singapore as well has certain areas that you're not supposed to go. These are places that are restricted because of conservation reasons, so the birds that are protected, the area is protected, fewer disturbances from people. As the bird watcher in me, definitely I also want to go there and find something I haven't seen one in Singapore for quite a while. And yeah, we'll be quite interested to discuss with NParks about the ways we could mitigate disturbances from bird watchers when going into different sites. That's also one of the things that happens a lot when rare birds show up. Many birders just crowd, and generally most of the people stay along the trail and don't make disturbances, but there are always certain, like sheep. So with regards to country march, I cannot promise you that we'll be able to go, but definitely if there are opportunities to discuss these ideas with the National Parks Board, we'll be super happy to. I think David will be the best person to speak to. Somewhere further.
So just to jump onto that, I think it's also important to understand both sides, the perspective from both sides, right? And I think in one case it is, we do want to see the birds, right? We really, really do want to see the birds. At the same time, the concern is that like, too many people go, there's too much disturbance, and that's a problem. So I think all of the discussions that we have, if we want to do things like this, we're really about how to dovetail, sort of like get both things done in a way that doesn't really impact the other. So people can see the birds and impact birds less. Can it be done in an easy, feasible way? We're not sure because we haven't had these discussions yet. But will we want to explore having discussions of this nature? Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, something
Sorry, but one from online first.
Hi. Alright. Anonymous asks, what differentiates you from other bird groups and societies in Singapore?
So there are multiple groups in Singapore that is working on bird stuff. There's the Nature Society Bird Group, there's the Bird Ecology Study Group, there are also others that are well. I think one of the big things that are different is our transparency and our vibrantness. So when it comes to the records that we put online, the data that we put online, as Jack shared, we are super transparent about the way we do that. If there are changes that are made, we make sure the edits are properly reflected. If there's data to be shared, it's online. Of course, we don't share every single confidential information, but in general, that's the way our values are. Another thing is that, I think our open approach to ensure that we are open to discussions, we are always keen to hear ideas that we can work on, even if there are ideas that we might disagree with, we are professional about that, so we can agree to disagree and always find common ground to work together. And I think that's how we would want to approach many of you here in the room today when we start working on projects together. We're professional in the way we do things. We are fun guys. We like to have fun and watch birds together, but we do know how to be serious as well. And another big part, I think, is the resources that we have. So the Singapore Birds Project, previously known Bird Society of Singapore, the Birds of Singapore website, every single species in Singapore you can find information about that. No other bird society in Singapore can parallel us in that. The articles that we produce as well, they are up to date, they are fast, the data there is precise, it's informative. These are ways that we ensure that people can learn about birds in Singapore in these online mediums. So yeah, that's I think one of a few of the strengths that we have in our society.
We'll take a question from our in-person audience.
Hi. So I'm Raphael, and I think my question is more revolving around the record keeping side of things. So you mentioned how BirdSoc is very big on transparency. So I was wondering, in the case of like a contentious bird sighting, how does the records committee decide or make a decision on it?
Hello, thanks for your question. I don't know why I'm answering RC related matters when RC chairman is on my right and RC vice chair is on my left. Yeah, but how do we resolve contentious records? For birds that may be of uncertain provenance, first thing absolutely we make sure we do our due diligence and ask regional experts about where the bird might have come from, their opinions, because we accept that we don't know everything, and we do rely on the expertise of people who are not necessarily part of BirdSoc or not even from Singapore. And secondly, within our own committee, we do have disagreements, and that's a good thing, because what's the point of everybody sharing the same opinion? It's good to have discourse, and when we vote on the veracity of records, we actually have all these discussions within ourselves, and then we put them out into articles, and we list all of our rationale behind why we eventually settled on the decision. Most recently, I think we had an article about the origin of the striped-throated boo at Chik Jawa. So that's an example of one of the birds that we did not necessarily accept because the votes were divided. We put it in the limbo. But most importantly, even though we didn't reach a really formal decision, we put them out into an article and we list all the reasons that some people think it's a wild bird, some people think it's not of wild origin. But most importantly, we have all these reasons out on our article, and you are free to read it. So you may not agree with us, we may not agree with ourselves, but at least we put all the information out in a transparent manner.
Unfortunately, we're nearly out of time, so we'll take one last question.
David from Solar Group. Just want to address the question just now regarding to the opening the area we manage closely, and how the scenario we manage it, and how you may have access to the area. So basically, Keita has made it clearly that the purpose of restricted access is for protect the birds. So basically, less people visit the site, then the bird feels safer. So basically, I knew that very obviously, even though the left wing, for example, for the far away 100 or 200 meter away, so when people get into the core area, they will start running. So imagine if public all goes into there, so basically the disturbance definitely is tremendous. So however, the area is not totally, restricted. Yeah. So you can get in. So basically, before COVID, we do once a while have an opening session to allow public to go into the sites. The other thing is, there used to be guided walk, run monthly. So also by Nature Society. Yeah. So however, now because after COVID, this summer program will not have been revamped. Then one more opportunity is join as unmarked bird census volunteer. Yeah. So I knew Adrian for 5 years. Actually, Adrian been doing monthly census at Sungai Group Call. Yeah. So basically, we do need volunteers help us to gather information, understand the status, and help us to better protect the site. So I just want to clarify this a little bit so people you understand us better and support our action. Thank you very much.
Thanks for sharing, David. Definitely, we are super aware of the many problems that might have with public access, and we are in line with what the National Parks will think about the protection of these areas. I think it would be super cool if we could discuss, and maybe we can also have our organized guided walks in these more restricted areas someday. But yeah, now that COVID is less of a problem, let's eventually talk about that in the near future.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for our Q&A. So I'll now be passing the floor back to our MC for MC Cheng Teng, who will bring us back with our closing remarks from Keita.
Okay, that's bring us to the end of the Q&A segment. Thank you to all our speakers for their valuable insights, and to you, the audience, for your brain-picking questions. Mr. Keita, President of the Bird Society of Singapore, will now deliver his closing remarks.
Hello. So, first of all, a huge thank you to all of you who are here today with us and also online watching this. It's really a huge honor for us to be able to launch our society in such a grand manner. And also a huge thank you to NLB for helping organize this location. Yeah. Location sponsor. Thank you, Sam, for all of the admin stuff. And importantly, I would also like to get all of our BirdSoc members to stand up so that when you see them in the field, please talk to them, ask them questions, discuss with them the ideas that you might have. These are the leaders. Additionally, I also want to thank our volunteers who are all behind. Can you all stand up, please? Without their help and their efforts, we would not have been able to organize this event. And we want to thank every single one of you for helping us out. So yeah, we're going to begin a new chapter of bird watching in Singapore, begin a new chapter of protecting nature in Singapore. Let's work together, see you all in the field. Thank you.
And with that, we have come to the end of the launch of BirdSoc SG. Thank you for taking the time off to celebrate this milestone with us. I would once again like to thank NLB for their generous support for this event, our partner organizations and friends, you know who you are, without which we would not be here, and everyone else for our support. We wish you all a pleasant day ahead, and we'll see you on the field. Thank you.